The billions echo strong. The journey goes lifelong. Aspiring to change.
Let's talk about the idea of mysticism versus rationalism, but more specifically, or to begin, the idea of what people such as myself have, which is kind of a problem in the modern world, or in the reality construct we live in, is this obsessive need for knowing the truth, the unrelenting desire to peel back the layers, to peel back the veils of distortions and lies, disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, social engineering, mind control, on and on and on it goes. The very fundamental nature of much of our reality, especially in the modern era, is based on lies, deceptions, distortions, taking advantage of people's ignorance, lack of education on certain matters, lack of spiritual awareness, lack of discernment, lack of critical thinking. And these things, we're not born with these lacks and propensities and weaknesses and disabilities, as it were, because they're over a lifetime inculcated and programmed and beaten into us in some occasions, dependent on your circumstance, where you grew up, the family, the belief structure, everything else that defined your childhood and into your formative years and even into adulthood. And a lot of people are stuck in that kind of rut and routine for their entire lives. So they don't entertain a lot of these notions that people such as myself and other people who are, desirous and obsessed with getting to the truth of things. For our whole life, it's a battle. It's a constant struggle. It's a constant polarity, a duality, because everything around us has some sort of element of deception. Every fundamental thing in our life has some sort of element of lying or misrepresenting, or, the ideas of selling, market, economy, finances, government, education. Good grief. Every aspect of society, your religion, your spirituality, the arts, whatever you want to look at, when it's coupled with the idea of the market or capitalism or commerce in any way, shape, or form, it automatically seems to adopt or demand a certain level of misrepresentation, deception, whatever you want to call it. And it's, packaged nicely in these colloquial ideas and these concepts such as marketing and sales and copy and, the manipulation and encoding of certain language and certain types of language in order to get the money, in order to sell the stuff, in order to sell yourself, your idea, your offerings, your contracts to the market, to the world, to sustain yourself, to pay for things, to buy useful things like food, housing, clothing, that kind of craziness. So we live in a world that, by and large, relies on some level of deception and distortion, unfortunately, in many of these offerings. Whether you're selling yourself to get a certain trajectory or a career path happening, whether you're selling an offering or product or skill, a skill set, a capacity, a service, a trade, whatever it might be. When it comes to the monetary or the commercial or the marketability or whatever aspect of it that attaches it to the necessity of earning a living, and the spellcasting of that concept in itself is nefarious and disgusting. Why do you have to earn a living? You're alive. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to find reason or rationale for your existence. You don't have to sell something, yourself, your soul, or otherwise, just for the sake of living on earth. What a nonsensical concept, rife with all sorts of distortions and deceptions. So when it comes to providing for ourselves, when it comes to sustaining ourselves in this market economy, in the world of commerce, capitalism, which defines our era, defines our time in history, this epoch, is all based on money and capital and trade, right? Every level of government, every level of geopolitics is involved in some way, shape, or form in the banking or financial aspects of the fundamental nature of our reality. unless you're able to dissociate yourself and live off grid, be completely self-sustaining. But even then, you can't get to that point by default. You have to work your way out of the system unless you were born into it, unless, you know, you had the resources or your family had land that you were somehow able to grow into, or that was given to you through someone's passing, or just kept in the family, like, you know, these so-called elites that we talk about that have these things, that have unlimited resources, access, or, you know, heritage that goes back and generations, centuries, perhaps millennia, that allows them to have perpetual resources, land and such, to live with and to protect their assets, to close themselves in from the rest of the world, to shield themselves from the machinations of capitalism and wars and conflicts and geopolitics, whatever it might be. They live in a completely different reality than the vast majority of us do. Any of us who ever have considered the need for earning a profit or earning a living or career paths, trades, what have you, anybody, which is the vast majority of humanity, that has to think of or consider these things, can't even conceive of what it would be like to live on the other side of that fence, right? And unfortunately, in our world, in our reality, it's these very same people, these families, these ancient oligarchs and such, that maintain the hegemony that controls all of the world's money supply, all the world's markets, influences politics and borders, redefines borders, pits countries, you know, against each other to kill off humans that are in the way of certain resource management, what have you. They don't really care about the human factor, because, again, they have a completely different psychology about them, a completely different perspective of the world. To them, it's, of course, I'm presuming to know, but given my imagination, what I can only think of being completely dissociated from a heart-centered, caring and empathic, compassionate human, what's the opposite? What is, you know, based on my life, based on my experiences, based on everything I know about what is, you know, decent, good and just and righteous, what's the opposite of that? Or a distortion of that from an elitist, sort of narcissistic, psychopathic sort of perspective that doesn't have the everyday average considerations at heart, that thinks primarily, you know, in these kind of above the rabble sort of perspectives. And any one of us can imagine it. We've seen it in films and TV shows. We've read it in books. We have, you know, we've seen hints of those villains that we've seen through films that are completely misrepresented, of course. The elites and these ultra wealthy ancient families and such, the black nobility, whatever you want to call them, that have been around forever and persist throughout resets and cataclysms. You know, they just survive. Not unlike cockroaches, but perhaps that's far too complimentary. Regardless, they exist. They are part of this realm. And we can't live like them, even though we may imagine what that type of freedom and that type of access and that type of completely different framework of reality might offer us. We can only imagine and fantasize, quite literally, because it is a fantasy for the most part. And the fact that the vast majority of us will never really know that, even if we make 6, 7, 8 figure incomes, even if we get to 1 billion, it would still be a laughable joke to those with real power and real resources that are as ancient as time. But the point of my chat here is back on the reality level from which I perceive reality, from the level of living and lifestyle and understanding and potentiality that are within my means, and the idea of this obsession with truth. Because you can dig down, you can find out all the truths about these oligarchs and those that maintain the hegemony and control everything, and the self-professed owners of the world. And, you know, they quite literally are. So to think we're going to change that system and affect any sort of difference is ridiculous on the surface of it, and a complete waste of time. You can learn everything you want about them, and then what? Like they don't know, right? You know, like they aren't aware, like they haven't dealt with any and all types of uprisings and revolutions and stuff, and have in fact been responsible for creating revolutions, guiding and curating and maintaining narrative scripts for societies to ensure that certain things will happen, to ensure uprisings happen and divisions and religious wars and economic wars, sanctions. You don't think that they're part and parcel to this entire process and actually inciting and creating and perpetuating these events? I mean, come on, get over yourself. All that we can affect is on a much smaller level, on a far more personal level, in the reality that we live within, which is a completely different framework, a completely different reality from those so far beyond the idea of, taxes and earning a living and such. On the ground, as it were, the foot soldiers of humanity and the vast majority of civilization, we have to contend with different levels of lies, distortions, deceptions, and malevolence, and how much and how often and how far we're willing to go in order to sustain ourselves, in order to provide a means, a modicum of access and resources with which to live our best life, however we might imagine that to look. But the problem, of course, with those of us who are keen to desire and discern and unveil and reveal the truth, peeling away all the lies and distortions, because the truth obviously never needs to be defended. It's self-evident once you peel away all the garbage and distortions. Once you peel away all the nonsense and layering, which is constantly being painted over and over, it's quite the patina in our reality game. Layers and layers, generations and generations of fiction on top of fiction, myth on top of myth, that keeps us disoriented from what's real and true. And so be it. It can serve us too, right? Our life's too short to really figure it all out. And we'll usually kill ourselves long before our due date because of stress and trauma and all the rest of it, because of the inability perhaps to not necessarily shield ourselves, but to pull away those lies, distortions, veils, those layers of programs and conditions that disempower and keep us in certain mind frames and mindsets of scarcity, lack, fear, anxiety, panic, vengeance, resentment, right? Thinking that there's got to be something we can do. There's got to be a way to stand up and resist these powers, which is asinine on the surface of it. If you just think about it, just the scale of what would have to happen will never happen, because it has never happened in the history of humanity. Going back as far as we really can effectively go back, which is maybe 6,000-ish years for this particular cycle that we're living in. So we don't know what we don't know. And even within known recorded human history, we have all sorts of gaps and memory holes, and no way to really discern everything that is real and true about it, because there are interpretations of interpretations, and the whole system, the whole idea of information retrieval is discombobulated and derailed at every step. So you can't really ever dig down to the whole and complete truth, not from the outside, not based on data, information, recordings, historical records and the like, right? Because it was a man, a woman, somebody involved that had certain biases, certain pre-programmed notions, certain predispositions, political interests, spiritual, whatever it might be. They had certain biases and distortions to their process that would never allow them to write something in earnest, blatantly honestly and authentically as it was for what it was, because it's going through their own perception filters, reality filters, on and on and on. But getting back to my main point that I was trying to talk about in the first place, it's this dichotomy, it's this paradox, right? There's always some level of paradox in virtually every aspect of what's important to us. When it is your MO in this particular life to live for what is true, to stand up for what is true, when your guiding sort of spirit is to not only know what is true, but live by it, to have a certain moral and ethical standard. When you approach anything to do with capitalism, it's a constant struggle, because, as I was saying earlier, there's a certain element of deception when it comes to selling, marketing, promoting, because nobody really needs anything that you're offering. Most of the things that we think we need in the commercial world and the industrial world is problems made up from problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Solutions that are made up for problems that were just fabricated, or some other sort of innovation or something that came along that was poorly conceived and created a whole set of other problems that needs solutions. That, it's whatever it might be. If it's a product that's not made to last, or it's defective in certain ways, or it was made too quickly, or wasn't, it's just a rip-off of a rip-off of a rip-off, right? So it's already lacking in its conception. But because the motivation was profit and not necessarily productivity or longevity, we live in an era of, planned obsolescence, right? Especially in the technology community. Companies like Apple, which, they tend to make excellent technology and products, but they purposely brick them and purposely make software that destroys or shuts it down or gets to a certain point. They just won't support it anymore because you need to buy the new one, even though, the 10, 12, 15-year-old system works perfectly well, whatever it might be, a laptop, phone, or a desktop version of a computer or a tablet. They are built well, generally, right? And they last far beyond what would be the corporate and industrial due date, which would harm their profits. And there's a reason why these behemoths become trillion-dollar plus entities. There's a reason that they just keep growing, because they have to, as part of their business model, lie and deceive. Part of that is bricking and purposely shutting down old technology that works perfectly well if you had a way to break it open and have some control over it. And there are those in the community, in the open source software community, that are enabling those of us with older systems to upgrade to newer operating systems and such, so that, the 2012, 2011, 2013 sort of iMacs and laptops or tablets can live again and upgrade to newer apps and such. But you have to bypass, that architecture, that operating system that's purposely designed to be limited, so that you need to keep buying new and better, not necessarily better, but newer iterations of the same technology that really hasn't changed much, I would argue, since the mid-90s. It's the same idea. It's a little more RAM, it's a little more CPU, it's a little more GPU, it's a little more whatever fidelity on the monitor, but they're just minor incremental improvements, and they know that. iPhone 6 or iPhone 16 or 44, whatever the hell they are now, they do the same thing. They're not anything novel. There's not anything better. And now they're, integrating AI and such too, which is that an improvement? I don't know. It's just more distraction. It's more deferring, your intellect and creativity to software and technology, which again, that's an element of deception and people misrepresenting themselves and their skills and their capacities by utilizing these tools, by utilizing the AIs and the Photoshops and whatever it is to enhance and even to do most of the hard work that an artist used to have to do. Especially, obviously I talked about music before, how now in seconds and, a couple of minutes, based on a basic idea and a couple of prompts, you can have a couple of fully produced, well-mixed, professionally mastered type recordings for free. And you could do it all day long. You just go to another site, use another email address, open up another account, and just keep plugging away. Make 10, 15 versions of the same song in an hour, all of which are perfectly marketable and sellable, and you can have the commercial license for a couple of bucks if you want. Where's the artistry in that? They're trained on pop music. They're trained on the top selling type of artists, and they did all that basically illegally too, right? Nobody was asked whether their AI could be trained on all of your music library, or, they're going to sue them after the fact and they'll, oops, sorry, we didn't realize we couldn't do that. Meanwhile, millions and millions of iterations of songs based on, these algorithmic sort of popular song structures and things, the formulas that, people know well, or that have been forced into the public consciousness as this is good music, whatever it might be. Another element of lies and distortion.
Thoughts come in hidden measures. I haven't figured out their ways.
So when you're oriented toward living truthful, to unveiling, unpacking, pulling back the layers, showing the lies and distortions, as someone like me is wont to do and has been aligned toward their entire life, it's a struggle to fit into the system, to find ways to support yourself without some element of misrepresentation, some element of lying and deception. So people like me generally have to rely on other people who aren't afraid to work in that gray zone, who aren't afraid to, wheel and deal and misrepresent and, hey, I need somebody to do it. Can you do that? Well, sure, of course I can. Just like an actor trying to get a job. Hey, can you sing and dance? Of course I can. No, but they'll figure it out over the weekend if they get the role. And isn't that particularly telling and an apt example, perhaps, because aren't we all just actors trying to get those roles? Whether you're trying to get a contract for building a house or fixing a car or installing software on someone's computer, repairing whatever it might be that's trades based, whether it's something artistically based, whether it's getting a job in that you're far overqualified to have, so you have to lie and downplay, again, misrepresenting and lying and distorting what's real and true so that you can earn a few bucks, get a paycheck, get some sort of stability, get some sort of cash flow, what have you. Every single element, in my experience, perhaps it's biased, maybe not. There's always some element of chicanery, nonsense, manipulation, misinforming, disinforming, lies, and deception. And so, who am I really? I mean, am I some sort of holier than thou or perfect human living by perfect principles and all these things? Fuck no. I mean, give me a break. I'm as fallible as the next man. But as I speak frequently, the idea is the principle of the thing, the foundational idea, the spiritual based underpinning of everything that we do, because how we do anything is how we do everything. So if we're okay compromising in this particular aspect of our life, if we're okay compromising in this relationship, if we're okay with compromising with our children in this particular regard, we're going to do it everywhere else, consciously or not, because it's okay to bend those rules. It's okay to work in that gray area. And perhaps that's something we just have to do in this reality. And so that, for me, and people like myself, is difficult. It's difficult to contend with and reconcile because it's just this constant little poking. It's a very prickly sort of thing, prickly energy that's uncomfortable and aggravates and agitates. The problem isn't necessarily being too honest. It's just that even before the words are going to come out of your mouth, even, regardless of the asking and the request, immediately you can feel that sort of energy about it, that you're going to have to put on a certain persona, a character, a presentation, a front, to be able to justify, charge what you're worth. All these terms and phrases that we use to massage and blur ideas and to make ourselves accommodating to the market and to commerce and earning a living. And those of us who want to do well and get into, 6, 7, 8 figures, I don't know. I'm sure not everyone's twisting things around or lying to everybody. But when you scrutinize the offerings of some of these people that have done very well, they are repeating ideas that certainly aren't their own, whether it's in success, marketing, what have you. Anything that they've found commercial, especially self-help, spirituality, good grief. Multi-billion-dollar industries, right? That propped up on complete lack of originality, regurgitating ideas that have been said 100,000 times in 100,000 different ways over the centuries, and especially in the last century and a half, because we've moved into an era of relative prosperity and abundance in our time. And so these ideas reemerge and get injected into the public consciousness, into the zeitgeist, reintroducing these ideas of self-help and personal transcendence and personal transformation, right? We have to make up ideas and motivate and inspire ourselves because life has gotten a hell of a lot easier, relatively, to the generations that had to grow all their own food, that had to build their own homes, that had to maintain, that had to, maybe even bucket water to their homes and forget about electricity. So when we move into the era of relative abundance and ease, again, relative, and it doesn't come at cheap, right, to the rest of the world. For us in the West and Western Empire, or these wealthy societies, relatively, comes at great cost to somebody else who you don't see. Where do the raw materials come for your phone and computers? from some kid getting beaten up and poisoned and toxified who will probably die of cancer before he's 20 in a mine in Africa, right? Or scraping the ocean floor, or on and on and on, right? If we actually scrutinized and looked into virtually everything that allows us to have relative ease, comfort, prosperity, and abundance, we would probably puke, because none of it comes for free. But that's the illusion that we're sold, right? And so, again, for someone like myself, the more you get to know about these things and how these threads are interwoven throughout society and civilization, the more you get to understand and appreciate these things, the more difficult it can be to participate and to survive, and never mind thriving, just surviving and kind of finding a baseline of some sort of a baseline existence wherein you don't feel like you're pirating or predating or being a parasite in some way, shape, or form on this plane. Because depending on what we do, depending on what we like to eat, depending on how we like to live, the vehicles, the homes that we like to live in, the lifestyle that we, the clothing that we wear, the technology that we use to make these video blogs and walk and talk things and then distribute it to the world, every bit of it has some sort of a cost that we're unconscious and unaware of, unless and until we become conscious and aware of it. And therein lies the problem. It's this dichotomy, right? This paradox. And I've spoken about everything about our life, our human life, is in some way, shape, or form paradoxical, right? The paradox of free will, the paradox of the nature of God and life and spirituality, the paradox of, being everything and a tiny fractal of everything. And the paradox, of course, as I'm speaking to in this particular chat, the paradox of living in a truthful, honest, and authentic way and having to contend with the commercial nature and the capitalistic nature of everything that underpins modern society. So to find that happy balance, I'm not sure it exists. I think that's an illusion. It's more likely to be one of those oscillating things, right? We'll go in and out of our comfort zone. We'll go in and out of our satiety with material gains and what it is that we really and truly want to attain. And then, of course, how far we're willing to compromise and do ourselves harm in the acquisition and maintaining of it. And for some of us, it's far more difficult than others. For some of us, the practicalities, if we chose to, let's say, have children and raise a family, that completely alters your perspective and your trajectory, because now you have other mouths to feed, quite literally, and you have the partnership and the relationship. So you have to contend immediately with setting aside most of these philosophical ideas like someone such as myself would consider, single, no kids, no family. It's a completely different paradigm. It's a completely different perspective, not completely different, but an altered and more streamlined, perhaps, level of priorities and values, given the entire framework of what you're building and wanting to achieve, and to hopefully, healthfully, do everyone good and right and just in raising decent human beings and the rest of it. But then how are you going to act? How are you going to behave? What kind of decisions are you going to model for them and for your partner? How are you going to be in your relationship with the love of your life, the person with which you bring children into this world? How are you going to behave, and where are you going to compromise and accommodate? How are you going to find that sort of balance, right? Because it's an intricate dance. It's not a simple black or white thing. And we can lie to ourselves and say that it's this or that. There's the idea, the philosophy that having children forces you to get serious about your career and your aspirations and creating sustainability and, having some sort of financial foundation that can take care of the basic needs, provide for housing and food and the basic, basic sustenance that we have to live in, and some semblance of variety and mystery and engaging in the world and travel and adventure and journeying and experiencing hopefully different cultures and such. Then there's all the rest of it. What do you want to expose them to, whether it's sports or arts or education and institutions, where the things that are going to shape their reality and their ideas, and where are you going to compromise, and how are you going to accommodate the various things that are going to come at you, and how are you going to contend with and reconcile with all the ideas and offerings that come from those institutions and how they're going to threaten to impose ideas, beliefs, and paradigms and all of that onto you and those you are tasked with raising. And in the meantime, where and what and how are you going to pay for it all? And how far are you willing to go to lie and deceive in order to make those things happen? What level of game playing are you going to engage with? How much are you going to be comfortable with in your life? And what is going to define your character and how you present yourself to the world in that regard? And all of this to say, maybe I'm not even approaching a point. It's just philosophizing and expressing a concern. I was listening to a podcast with a gentleman who was expressing, these big ideas and laying down the simple truth of the nature of this reality. And if we're concerned with truth, it was just a comment that he said offhand, probably reflecting on his own life and the fact that he, is divorced and committed to a certain path, committed to aggressively, writing about these true things about our world and exposing all these nefarious things about our reality. I mean, again, it's nothing new. It's people such as him and myself in other ways have been talking about these things since forever, because that element of our reality has always existed. It's that polarity, that yin-yang. And I've argued that this is the reason for this particular construct, the reason that it's laid out in exactly the way that it is, that it seems like, evil gets a free pass, but also good gets a free pass, right? So it's all a matter of perspective and degrees. Which side of that invisible boundary do you operate on more than the other? And it's not to say that you're going to be judged one way or another, but, compromising and accommodating and finding your particular degree and your particular style and character in this world is very personal. And we are the only ones who really ultimately know ourselves, for the most part, when, as much as we can be honest with ourselves about anything. But we know, intimately when we're misrepresenting, lying, deceiving for the sake of satisfying some sort of a contract or an offering or, getting paid for a certain type of work, selling something, whatever it might be, whoring ourselves out in different ways to make ends meet, to, admit to ourselves that there is a certain amount of slavery to it, no matter which way we look at it. When and if we need the money, we got to do things to get the money. And none of us can really get away with lying to ourselves completely about it. I don't care who you are and how brazen or tough you think you are. You simply can't lie to yourself. That's the nature of your being, the essence of what activates and animates your very avatar and allows you to exist in the first place, knows full well when you're trying to lie and deceive, especially to yourself. So don't think that you can get away with that kind of stuff. At the same time, it's completely up to you how much you want to integrate that sort of lying and deception sort of element into your life. Some people are quite masterful at it, and they can go along and get along and make do and don't give it really a lot of energy or consideration at all, because again, life's too short. Whereas, someone who's by default oriented toward the truth and what's real and genuine is going to struggle with it, right? It's not that either way is better or worse. It's just, you got to pick your poison, right? You got to choose the type of shit sandwich you want to eat, because regardless of the path you choose in this life, there are going to be shit sandwiches. So, it's a matter of what kind of bread and fixings you're going to put along with that you're going to have to contend with. No matter what, you're going to have to eat it to some degree in this particular realm, in this era, in this time. There's a kind of endemic, systematic configuration to this whole thing, right? There's a certain conflux of energies. There's a certain perpetual something about it, a certain character to it, a certain essence that you cannot deny exists, because use your eyes, right? Feel into the world, see the world, listen to your small, still voice, all these things that are constantly fighting for your attention within and without. You can feel there's a certain nature, there's a certain something that persists in this realm, in this reality, that we're reconciling with on the daily. minute by minute, second by second. So we decide for ourselves how and where we're going to compromise and accommodate that particular energy, whatever you want to call it. I think the challenge perhaps, or maybe the important thing, is to just be aware when it might be overwhelming, be aware when it might be, taking the lion's share of your focus, your energy, your presence. Be aware when it might be, leading you to do things that are uncomfortable and go fundamentally against your code, your moral code, whatever it might be, wherever you might be on that particular spectrum. And if you don't like it, if it's uncomfortable, either you need to change yourself, or you need to change how you go about it and how you integrate that into your life, right? You can't change the fundamental nature of reality per se. All you can do is change how you integrate and interpret and utilize those energies. Negative or positive bias is completely up to you. The world, as it's presented to us, seems to offer a lot more negative bias. It seems to have a negative default. And in this particular era, that might be true. But that also means that we're up to that we're designed and came into this life exactly and perfectly capable of contending with it, of reconciling with it, of dealing with it, of taking it in stride. That means that we are perfectly capable of handling it and more. That we are perfectly capable and artistic and creative and sovereign enough to take it all in stride and surpass and rise above and set it aside as story, narrative, what have you. Lies, distortions, propaganda, nonsense. Not real, no thank you. We came into this time, into this era, into this particular life, not by accident, right? And I've said this a few times, I will say it again, because I need to remind myself, as often as anyone else, there are no victims here, only volunteers. So you volunteered to come here. However you want to frame that, however that came to be, you're here now, and you are capable and able and creative and with an unlimited energy source, able to contend with anything and everything that comes at you, regardless of the story and the presentation, the mask or the facade that it might have. That's, I think, perhaps the most useful thing to take, if anything, from this particular little rant. And I hope it's useful to you. So, enough said. Have a good one.
It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me we are in drought season. That's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to see, and the sky is falling right on top of me, but they tell me it's for the greater good.